Welcome to Downstage Center, a production of XM Satellite Radio and the American Theater Wing. I'm John von Seusten, Program Director of XM 28 on Broadway.
And I'm Howard Sherman, Executive Director of the American Theater Wing.
We're joined today by Richard Thomas. Richard, most people, of course, know you from the Waltons on television, but they're probably unaware that at age 7, you appeared on Broadway in Sunrise at Campobello. Then a year after that, along with Julie Harris, Christopher Plummer, and Hume Cronin, in Ibsen's A Dollhouse. And now you're about to return to Broadway in a new show imported from London called Democracy.
That's right.
Tell us about Democracy. I know what it's about, but for the purpose of people who don't, quickly summarize.
Democracy is the latest play by Michael Frayn, whose last play in New York was Copenhagen in 2000, I think, which was directed by Michael Blakemore. This production is also directed by Michael Blakemore. It started at the National Theatre in London. It moved to the West End, played in London for about a year, just closed there. And so we're bringing it over, and it's an amazing play. It's very different from any play, I think, that's going to be on this season. It's a bona fide, real history play, which is something that we don't see very much of anymore. But it's filled with information, but also very fast moving and very funny and very gripping. I think it's a fascinating play. Now,
as I understand it, you play an East German spy.
Yes, I do. I'm
opposite James Naughton, who plays West German Chancellor Willy Brandt.
That's right.
How does that work?
Well, this is one of the things that's so interesting. Europeans, of course, the British, the French, are much more aware of each other's political history than we are as Americans of European history for the most part, except for the European history that affects us directly. Willy Brandt, very important Chancellor of West Germany, governing mayor of Berlin when the wall went up. He was the great his sort of great contribution was that he began to make peace and treaties with Eastern countries. After the Second World War, of course, it was very important for West Germany to heal the wounds with the West and direct itself to its relationships with the United States, Great Britain, France, and all that. But Willy Brandt, when he was elected chancellor in the late 60s, in 1969, felt that it was also very, very important to heal the wounds of separation with the Eastern Bloc, with Russia, with Poland, especially with East Germany, the other half of Germany, because Germany had been torn apart. So he began this process of amelioration and reconciliation with the East, and that's really where the story begins. My character, Gunther Guillaume, was a Stasi spy, an East German spy who was placed in the Chancellor's office and who ended up being Brandt's personal assistant for many years. And when this was discovered and the spy was brought out in the open, Brandt's government came down. He was also a great womanizer, Willy Brandt, and this was something that they also used as a club to beat him down. However, the ironic thing about it is that it really was the machinations within his own party and some of the aspects of coalition government that brought Brandt down. The spy scandal was merely used, as the weapon to take him down. But certainly in the play anywhere, there were forces within the party working to get him out. And this is one of the ironies of the play.
Well, it's obviously, as you say, very specific history that Europeans would know. Does the play add layers of metaphor to this, or is it really just taking this situation and telling the story? Certainly in Copenhagen, there was some sense that there was the very core of the human story around the facts of the physicists. How does this play out in Democracy?
Well, it's a very good question, and as with Copenhagen, all of the above are true. It is the story very much of what happened in Germany. There's a huge amount of information about German politics and European politics, and it's fascinating. There's a lot of it, just as there was a lot of information about physics in Copenhagen. It also has at its core the story of the relationship between this great leader and this man who adored him and was admired him and was betraying him to these Germans at the same time. Very, very interesting story about betrayal and about trust. And that is set against the wide panorama, this historic panorama. In fact, in my opinion, it's very much like a Shakespeare history. It has great sweep. It has great movement. It has lots of characters, all guys, 10 men, guys in ties, I call it, moving across history and across the years at great speed, and yet at the center it has a very intimate story, and it's very inward. All of the characters reveal almost in a kind of shorthand their own inwardness, especially Guillaume and Brant. So you have a political play, a history play, a play of intimate relationships, and a play of philosophy.
And it's interesting because at least some of the period overlaps with a play which is now wrapping up its Broadway run, but I Am My Own Wife deals with East Germany in close to contemporaneous part of that.
Yes.
So obviously that has translated for audiences, so people shouldn't be put off if they're starting to hear all of these names about West German politics and Stasi spies.
I don't think what I'm hoping and what I'm sensing, I saw it in London, is that the sweep of the play pulls you along with it. And even if you don't get all that information right off the bat, things are reiterated and supported so often through the text that by the end of the evening you really do understand what happened. He wants you to get the nub of it. He wants you to understand essentially the subject of the play. I mean, it's not called Willy Brandt and it's not called Günther Guillaume. It's called democracy. And what it is about is, I don't know, if Copenhagen was about, physics and uncertainty, then democracy is very much about chaos theory and complexity. The idea that out of these 50 million egos that make up the German public, out of all of these different coalitions and all these different parties and all these different political factions, that somehow a consensus and a reconciliation is reached and a government goes forward, which looks simple and clear and which has clear institutions, is a bit of a miracle. Because what's at the heart of this play is the extreme complexity and contingency of these kinds of experiences. It celebrates this chaos and complexity of the democratic process.
You've used the word complexity several times. This Günther Guillaume sounds like a very complex character, quite a dark character.
Well, he is complex. He's not dark strictly. He is the antagonist, and yet it's very interesting what he's done. He's done so many extraordinary things with the play in terms of the form. Brant, of course, is the king figure, the central figure. Guillaume is the antagonist, and yet he's not the villain of the piece. The villain of the piece is political. Is the political betrayal and the men in his own cabinet who work against him to bring his downfall. The interesting thing about Guillaume, he is a spy, and yet at the same time he's the innocent in the play. He's the man who actually learns about his own country, is seduced and falls in love with the democratic process. And ends up identifying with this man who he's betraying. So in a way, even though he is duplicitous, he is actually an innocent. Brant, who is a very sympathetic, warm, and likable figure, is also a man who has had many identities in the past and who is very conflicted about his own sense of self. So at the core of the play, there are fantastic discussions of identity, self, the false self, the constructed self. And being a spy is very much like play acting in this particular piece.
Now,